100 rockets landed inside Israel in a single night. Not fired, landed, passed through. That number should stop you cold. Because for 2 decades, the story the world was told about Israeli air defense was simple. You fire, we intercept. You fail. Iron Dome became a symbol, not just of military technology, but of a certain kind of invulnerability. The idea that a small country, surrounded by hostile forces, had engineered its way out of the oldest problem in warfare. That idea died somewhere over northern Israel in the pre-dawn hours, and what replaced it is something the Israeli War Cabinet is now scrambling to answer. Here is what happened. Hezbollah launched 300 rockets and loitering munitions in a coordinated, simultaneous salvo from multiple positions across southern Lebanon. Iron Dome intercepted approximately 200. 100 broke through. That intercept rate, roughly 67%, sounds defensible until you understand that Iron Dome was designed and marketed, and above all psychologically understood, as a system that stops the threat. Not 2/3 of it. All of it. The gap between what people believed and what actually happened is where this crisis lives. The failure was not random. It was engineered. Hezbollah did not simply fire more rockets. They fired in a way specifically designed to collapse the physics of radar tracking. When launches happen simultaneously from 10, 15, 20 different positions, the targeting computers face a brutal triage problem. Prioritize which incoming projectiles threaten populated areas, calculate intercept windows, allocate missiles, all within seconds, all at once. The system was not malfunctioning. It was being mathematically overwhelmed. Every defensive system has a ceiling. This night found iron domes. Mixed into that salvo were decoys. Cheap, low-grade rockets that radar cannot easily distinguish from the real threat in the seconds available for decision-making. Each decoy that forced an intercept burned through 2 Tamir missiles at roughly $40,000 to $50,000 each. The math is grotesque. A rocket that cost $300 pulled a $100,000 response. Multiply that across hundreds of launches, and you are watching, in real time, an economic strategy disguised as a military one. Then came the drones. Low-altitude, terrain-hugging unmanned aircraft with radar cross-sections so small they register as noise rather than threat. Several penetrated the defense envelope entirely, not by overwhelming it, but by sliding beneath it, exploiting the physical geometry of a system built to track ballistic trajectories, not crawling machines that hug the contours of hills. The night was a laboratory. Hezbollah ran every experiment simultaneously. The downstream effects moved fast. Israeli markets opened to sharp losses. Insurance rates on northern properties spiked within hours. Civilian evacuations from communities in Galilee, already partially emptied from months of earlier pressure, accelerated. But the more important panic was quieter, happening inside closed rooms in Tel Aviv, where the War Cabinet faced a problem with no clean exit. Iron Dome's interceptor stockpiles are not infinite. They never were. Each battery carries a limited number of Tamir missiles, and resupply requires American manufacturing pipelines that run on their own timeline, their own politics, their own pressures. A sustained campaign of 300 rocket salvos, even one every few days, begins draining those stockpiles toward a threshold no one will publicly name, but everyone is privately calculating. Continue intercepting and you bleed the reserves. Stop prioritizing certain intercepts and rockets land in cities. The cabinet is caught between 2 forms of damage. The alternative, a ground offensive into Lebanon, carries its own weight. Hezbollah has spent years, arguably decades, preparing southern Lebanon as a kill zone. Tunnel networks, pre-positioned weapons, layered ambush positions built into terrain that historically punishes armored advances. The Israeli military knows this. They wrote the after-action reports from 2006. A ground invasion promises to stop the rocket fire by putting soldiers inside the source, and promises, simultaneously, to hand Hezbollah exactly the attritional war they were built to fight. This is what one night did. Not just damage to infrastructure, 4 industrial facilities struck, a logistics hub in Haifa partially disabled, a highway interchange collapsed. The physical damage is real but secondary. What the night actually produced was a forced revision. The doctrine that Israel's northern border was manageable through air defense, through periodic strikes, through deterrence maintained by technological superiority, that doctrine has to be rebuilt from a different foundation now. The question is what Hezbollah knew that the world did not. Because a military organization does not run an operation at this scale, this sophistication, this coordination, without having tested the answer in advance. What they revealed about their actual capability is where this story goes next. Hezbollah has not been a guerrilla force for years. The world just refused to update the file. The image that persisted, fighters in pickup trucks, Kalashnikovs, unguided rockets lobbed in rough directions, was accurate in 2006. It has not been accurate for a long time. What the pre-dawn salvo revealed was a military organization that has spent nearly 2 decades absorbing Iranian weapons technology, Iranian training doctrine, and Iranian strategic patience, and has emerged as something that Western threat assessments consistently underclassified. Not a militia, not a proxy in the diminutive sense. A multi-domain military force operating with precision-guided munitions, coordinated electronic warfare support, and a targeting architecture sophisticated enough to identify and strike specific infrastructure nodes inside a country with one of the most advanced air defense networks on Earth. The munitions that penetrated are the detail that demands attention. Among the confirmed strikes were warheads from the Fateh 110 family, Iranian ballistic missile variants that Hezbollah has received in modified form and that carry accuracy tolerances in the single-digit meters. Not approximately accurate, surgically accurate. A weapon like that is not fired to cause general chaos. It is fired at a specific coordinate, at a specific structure, for a specific purpose. The strike on the Haifa logistics hub was not luck. It was a planned target serviced by a precision weapon, which means Hezbollah had prior intelligence on that facility's function and decided it was worth a guided munition. Alongside those came the loitering munitions, what the press casually calls kamikaze drones, but which are better understood as slow, patient, flying warheads that can orbit a target area, wait, and strike the moment a specific condition is met. Several were programmed for a specific condition, the moment an Iron Dome battery fires. The launch signature, radar emission, heat bloom, acoustic profile becomes the trigger. The defense system's own act of defending becomes the targeting solution. This is not improvisation. This is a doctrine. Hezbollah studied Israeli defensive behavior, mapped the operational signatures, and built a munition designed to punish the response. Every intercept now carries a secondary risk. That is a new reality, and it has no easy technical fix. The timing of this assault was chosen, not coincidental. Israel's force structure at this moment is stretched across more simultaneous demands than at any point in recent memory. Gaza operations still consuming ground forces and logistical bandwidth, aerial assets rotating between multiple theaters, intelligence resources split across threat streams from the south, the east, and now accelerating pressure from the north. Hezbollah did not stumble into this window. They watched, calculated, and moved when Israeli capacity was at maximum distribution and minimum concentration. That is operational intelligence. That is planning at a level that should permanently retire the word militia from this conversation. Now set the military picture aside for a moment and look only at the numbers, because the numbers are where the deeper strategy becomes visible. A single Tamir interceptor missile costs between $40,000 and $50,000. Iron Dome fires 2 per target as standard protocol. 1 to intercept, 1 as redundancy. 1 intercept, roughly $100,000. 1 Hezbollah rocket, between $300 and $500. The ratio is somewhere between 200 to 1 and 300 to 1 in Hezbollah's favor on every single exchange. A 300 rocket salvo costs Hezbollah somewhere under $150,000 to assemble and fire. Israel burns through approximately $15 million in interceptors responding to it in one night. This is not a side effect of the strategy. This is the strategy. Iran and Hezbollah have understood for years that Israel cannot be conventionally defeated, not in the field, not in the air, not in any direct military confrontation that plays to Israeli strengths. So the objective shifts. You do not try to win the battle. You try to make the battle unaffordable. You run the clock, drain the stockpile, force dependency on external resupply, and inject political friction into that dependency. American interceptor manufacturing does not run at wartime surge capacity by default. Resupply requires congressional authorization, industrial scheduling, shipping logistics. Every week of sustained pressure is a week that gap between stockpile and demand quietly widens. Israel's defense establishment is acutely aware of this, which is why the interceptor inventory is among the most closely guarded figures in the Israeli security apparatus, because the number itself, if known, becomes a targeting variable. Hezbollah does not need to destroy Iron Dome. It needs to empty it. And at a burn rate of $15 million per major salvo, with salvos now demonstrated as a viable and repeatable tactic, the trajectory of that inventory points in one direction. The financial pressure compounds. Maximum readiness is not a temporary posture Israel can sustain indefinitely without structural cost. To its economy, to its reserve forces, to the civilian workforce those reserves are drawn from. Every mobilization week is a week of lost productivity multiplied across hundreds of thousands of people. The economic warfare dimension of this campaign is not metaphorical, it is arithmetically precise. Israel is now being squeezed from 2 directions simultaneously, military and financial, by a force that has prepared for exactly this confrontation for nearly 20 years. The question is what Israel does when pressure reaches the point where restraint stops being strategic and starts being interpreted by both sides as weakness. That answer came before sunrise. Before the sun rose over the Bekaa Valley, Israeli F-35s were already in the air. The strike package was substantial. Multiple aircraft, American-supplied bunker-penetrating munitions, targets pre-selected from intelligence accumulated over months. The explosions that followed were not ordinary. Secondary detonations, the kind that happen when a strike hits stored weapons rather than empty infrastructure, confirmed what Israeli planners had suspected. Hezbollah had been staging munitions in hardened positions across the valley in preparation for exactly the kind of sustained campaign that last night began. The Air Force hit real targets. The strikes were tactically successful by any measurable standard, and they changed the strategic situation almost not at all. This is the central frustration of Israeli air power in Lebanon, and it has been true since 2006, and arguably longer. Aircraft can find a position, strike it, destroy what is there, and return home. What they cannot do is hold ground, clear tunnels, or prevent a mobile launcher from being repositioned 3 kilometers east within hours of the strike. Hezbollah's entire military architecture was built around one foundational assumption, that Israel would eventually bomb it. The network is decentralized precisely because centralized infrastructure gets destroyed. The tunnels exist precisely because surface positions get hit. The mobile launchers exist precisely because fixed sites become craters. Israeli air power is not an answer to this problem. It is a pressure valve, necessary, useful, and insufficient. Israel is now fighting a war it was never structurally designed to sustain. The north is the most visible front, but it is not the only one. Gaza operations continue, consuming ground forces, logistical supply chains, and political capital simultaneously. Houthi forces in Yemen have been systematically targeting Red Sea shipping lanes for months, not randomly, but in calculated coordination with the broader Iranian pressure campaign, strangling the commercial corridor that connects Europe and Asia through the Suez Route and forcing cargo onto longer, more expensive paths around the Cape of Good Hope. Iranian-aligned networks in Syria and Iraq have conducted periodic strikes on American forward positions, keeping Washington's attention fragmented and its military planners running parallel contingencies. Each of these fronts, taken individually, is manageable. Taken together, they form a vice, and the vice is tightening. Israel's rarest assets are being rationed across simultaneous demands. F-35 sorties, radar coverage windows, interceptor inventory, intelligence processing bandwidth. Reserve mobilization, already deep into its second year of sustained pressure, is beginning to show the friction that every military planner knows comes with prolonged activation. Experienced soldiers cycling out of the workforce, small businesses collapsing, technical professionals absent from the civilian economy that funds the military machine itself. This is not a criticism of Israeli resilience, which is historically extraordinary. It is a structural observation. No country sustains maximum mobilization indefinitely without cost that eventually feeds back into military capacity. Now pull back further. Look at who is watching. Washington is present, visibly, rhetorically, and in terms of weapons resupply, but it is not intervening. The distinction matters. American political support for Israel is genuine and consistent. American appetite for direct military entanglement with Iran is something else entirely. The reason is not sentiment. It is the Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 20% of the world's oil transits that narrow passage. An Iranian closure, either through direct naval action or through credible threat, sends oil prices into territory that cascades immediately into consumer prices, heating costs, transportation costs, and the kind of economic pain that ends political careers. Washington is performing a continuous calculation. Support Israel enough to maintain the relationship and the regional architecture, but avoid the trigger that pulls Iran into direct confrontation and closes the strait. That calculation has held so far. It is not guaranteed to hold. Moscow watches with something close to structural satisfaction. Every week that Washington's strategic attention is consumed by the Eastern Mediterranean is a week that pressure elsewhere softens. Russia's alignment with Iran is not an accident of recent politics. It is a durable strategic arrangement that gives Moscow indirect leverage in a theater it cannot directly enter. No Russian soldiers, no Russian risk, meaningful Russian benefit. Beijing is doing something more patient still, staying publicly neutral, issuing calls for de-escalation that no one is listening to, and positioning itself for the moment the shooting stops. Post-war reconstruction, energy stabilization agreements, infrastructure financing, these are the instruments China reaches for. Capital instead of weapons. Influence accumulated in the silence, while others exhaust themselves. International institutions have produced statements. The statements have produced nothing. Here is what the worst case looks like, stated plainly. Israel concludes that air power has reached its limit and commits ground forces into southern Lebanon. The advance moves into terrain Hezbollah has spent years converting into a kill zone. Tunnel networks, pre-positioned anti-armor systems, layered ambush corridors built into geography that slows armored movement and isolates infantry. The fighting becomes attritional. Casualties mount on both sides. The timeline extends from weeks into months. Iran, watching its most capable proxy absorb sustained punishment, faces its own internal pressure calculation. From hardliners, from Revolutionary Guard factions, from the logic of deterrence that says a proxy destroyed without response is an invitation to repeat the operation elsewhere. Tehran moves to activate additional networks. Syria and Iraq escalate. The Houthi maritime campaign intensifies. The Strait of Hormuz becomes a bargaining chip, then a weapon. At some point in that trajectory, the conflict approaches a threshold that Israel has never formally acknowledged, but has always doctrinally maintained. A threshold that changes the nature of every conversation happening in every capital on Earth. A threshold that, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. That scenario is not inevitable. Conflicts at this scale have found exits before. Through exhaustion, through backroom negotiation, through the intervention of economic reality on all parties simultaneously. The pressure on Iran's own economy is real. The pressure on Hezbollah's political standing inside Lebanon, among a population that did not choose this war and is paying for it in destroyed infrastructure and international isolation, is real. These are the forces that create off-ramps, if anyone is willing to build one. But here is the question this crisis leaves open, and it is the question that will define the Middle East for the next decade, regardless of how the immediate fighting ends. Is Iran a rational actor executing a deliberate strategy with defined limits? One that wants pressure without explosion, influence without direct war? Or has the architecture it built, the proxies it armed, the patience it invested across 20 years, created a momentum that even Tehran can no longer fully control? The rockets that flew last night were Iranian technology, fired by Lebanese hands, aimed at Israeli cities, watched by the entire world. Every capital on Earth is now waiting for the answer to that question. And nobody, not in Washington, not in Moscow, not in Beijing, and not in Tehran, knows with certainty what it is.